Welcome to episode 78 of Beer with Strangers. I'm your host, Tony Russo, and I'm joined this week, as I'm joined most weeks, by my co-host, Doug Griffith.
Good afternoon, Tony. I'll go with my normal weather report. Not nasty, not real nasty, but it's raining, misty, so it's turned into not be a great day outside. Although for this time of year, the temperature is nice, but we do have a little mist in the air. But can't complain. It could be snow.
Yeah.
Be cold. So
Actually,
we're not doing bad.
Right now, I would prefer the snow. I have tonight, Winterfest of Lights opens in Ocean City, and it's something that I'm kind of responsible to cover.
So yes, it'd be much better in the snow than in the rain.
Yeah, and I sent a note to my boss, and I said, if it's awful, I'm not going to go because it'll be awful. But if it's like this, I can't in good like if it's not pouring, I can't in good conscience not go. But I know if I go, it's going to be miserable. So
hopefully it's not blowing.
Yeah, well,
yeah, makes it even worse.
I might just put it off till Saturday anyway, because I think we'll get a better crowd and better pictures and videos and stuff like that. So anyway, plenty of stuff to talk about this week, and we were actually
since we weren't here last week.
Since we weren't here last week, we were working with last week's show. One of the several things that happened last week was I was trying to get the new audio to work, and it just wouldn't. It just I'm fighting this, and I was telling Doug before we started. It's just that I'm too old, and like there's something that I'm missing about this new gear because it's state-of-the-art gear, and I had to upgrade my computer system. And hopefully you'll notice
saying you're not state-of-the-art anymore.
I'm not state-of-the-art anymore. I had to admit last night I was in Wilmington, and I had to admit to my daughter that my hair is getting old. I don't know if your hair officially turns old when you're 40, but like usually when it gets a little long, it starts to get a little wavy, starts to get a little kink, and now it's starting to feel a little old. It lays a little flat, as you may be able to tell.
Mine's gray or white anymore. I don't have much color left.
Yeah, so in this, it's tough to get old. This is the short version. Got plenty of things to talk about. We're working from last week's show notes, which you can find on surecraftbeer.com. But before we get into that, one of the things we were just talking about is that there is a new beer bar
in Rehoboth on Route 1, I heard. Wild River, I think it's called.
I'll buy that, Wild River.
And it's between where you turn off of Route 1 to go to Rehoboth and the bridge, somewhere in there. I've not been yet, but I understand it's got good selection. And the person who told me about it said it's similar to what Pickled Pig has as far as the craft beer selection.
Right, and so we started talking about Pickled Pig. Pickled Pig is a restaurant in Rehoboth, and one of the cool things about that is it's one of those places where the staff is knowledgeable about beer.
And technically, it's not Rehoboth; it's Midway.
Oh, is that
Midway between Rehoboth and Lewis? It's on Route 1, just north of 24, Route 24.
I'm sorry, is that where the Pickled Pig is?
Yeah.
Oh, then I was thinking of a different bar altogether. It's in downtown.
Pig and Fish.
Pig and Fish is what I was thinking.
I think they were owned by the same group, but they are on the avenue in Rehoboth.
Well, I'm sure Pickled Pig is fine. The story that I wanted to tell is that Al Stewart, who runs Stewart's Craft Brewing in Newark, that's where he says he sends, like, he doesn't send a lot of beer out. He sends very little beer out, but one of the places he does send it is the Pickled Pig.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
I just thought it was a different place the whole time.
Always impressed. You go in there and ask them about the different beers. They know the breweries, they know the beers. So if you're looking for a place to go and try different things, it's a good place because they can describe the different beers they have on tap, and they're always rotating. So you never know what you're going to get, but they always have good beers.
And one of the things so I work for surecraftbeer.com, and one of the things that we're always trying to do is find different ways that we can like educate the bar staff more. And I wonder if it's just like if you're in Rehoboth or in the Rehoboth area and Dogfish is there, if it's just like you start to get more people who expect it. And so the waiters and waitresses start to just take more time to learn the things and to get into it. I don't know if it's something, I'm wondering if it's something that can be done or if it's something that just occurs.
I do know a little bit about that. Yes, it can be done. And I know Sam from Dogfish has brought in, call them experts, at least more experts than the local people to go over how to present beers to customers, or how to describe a beer for a choice. So I know that he's had his staff sit through several presentations so that they become more educated on that selection.
Well, one of the things that I'm hoping to do is going to be similar to that. Is I'd like to start making videos with the brewers where they're talking about, like, you know, like Lori would say, this is Shore Break and this is about Shore Break, and just have, you know, 8, you know, 15-second videos.
How hoppy is it?
Right, and eventually have that catalog, so that one of the things because they're trying to get more of the brewers to be in to trying to get more of the staff to come to these big parties that we have, and I think that that's okay, but I don't think people take that home with them in the same way, because you get there, you have a couple beers, you start hanging out, and you take away a little bit of you, but most of what you take away is a feeling of, I like these guys, right? So you hang out with the brewery, like, I like that brewer, and you may not remember as much about the beer, and so when people ask you about it, you'll say something like, oh, I like that beer. But you know, like, but what you're really saying is, I like that brewery, and the brewer was nice to me. So I was thinking that this might be a better way to do that. It's been on my short list for a while, but it's been busy at the old Shorecraft Beer and OceanCity.com. I'm rewriting like much of the website, so it's been.
Well, it does make a good thing to do, I think, for people to be able to go to a site and know the different brews from different breweries and have good descriptions.
So and just on YouTube, absolutely.
So you can go to the brewery and have at least been educated a little bit,
right? Absolutely,
about their brews.
So that's one of the things that's on my that's going to be my winter project, because it's hard. It's also hard to grab the brewers when it's fall, like as you were saying. I mean, you guys were insane.
Things are slowing down. I mean, we're not even like the breweries trying to get out there as many places as possible. We do go some places, but we had each weekend we had an event to go to.
Oh, and speaking of which, let's talk about the one that you had Saturday. You had the all grain Saturday.
We had an all grain. It's just as part of our 2-year anniversary. So Sean brewed up the chimney soot stout, which is one of our recipes. He did it in all grain, and we always have it available as an extract kit, but have the recipe available if you want to do it as an all grain. We brewed 10 gallons. We split it into 2 batches of 5 gallons each, and we're putting a different yeast on each one. And just to highlight what the differences are when you use a different yeast, and that's to get a different beer. That's one of my favorite.
Yeah. This is the second time I've been here when you've done that. I think it's so outrageous when.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that the yeast, in a way, makes the beer. I mean, you can use a different yeast, you got a different beer. It's not
radically different. Yeah.
Well, it's the malt bill's the same, but the yeast profile or the flavor profile that you get out from the different yeast highlights some different components, whether it be it may accentuate the hop characters or the malt characters. So that's why the beers change.
And when I say radically different, I mean that, like, sometimes, because I'm fortunate, I hang out with people who can tell the subtle differences of beer. People get subtleties that I don't get. This isn't one of those things where you're like, oh, these are 2 different beers. You know, there's you can tell the difference. You don't need to have a fine palate to tell the difference between 2 identical beers from the same batch with different yeasts added.
And the reason we do it is to show what happens when you do a different yeast. But when we make up kits, we decide what's the most appropriate yeast for that kit by style generally. But if you like a certain yeast, you may find that kit that you're making is so much better for your palate with a different yeast.
Now, do you think, or is it your experience anyway, that the Belgians being popular, do you get more people using Belgian yeast? Are you going through that faster than you used to?
No, I don't think so. Most of our kits come with a predefined yeast. And occasionally we do get somebody who wants a different yeast. But for the most part, we stick what we feel are the appropriate yeast in the different different styles.
But when people order yeast, are they ordering more Belgian than they used to?
No, I don't think so. I haven't seen that.
That's why because it's funny that I guess is going to be the first yeast I'll be able to detect. I can't detect it yet, but sometimes I'll say, "Oh, what's familiar about this beer?" And someone will say, "It's a Belgian." I'm like, "Oh, all right," because a lot of times I just think of Belgian blondes. So when you get a Belgian brown ale or something like that, I'm always like, "Oh, that's yes, I can tell that's got that Belgian." And Belgian yeast is the one that will gives the spices, right?
Mm-hmm. Generally, yeah. But you get into the lambics, and it's a totally different yeast as well as bacteria.
Right. Yeah. They've been soured,
right.
Not soured, but they have a
tartness usually to them.
Tartness to them as well. And so speaking of lambic, we're going to talk a little bit now about the rise of hard ciders, which according to the internet, it was a Star Tribune, I think I'm going to make it up. Everybody has a Star Tribune. It's like maybe Texas, maybe Houston, Houston has a Chronicle. So it's someplace like that. It's not here. But they did a story.
It's out west,
someplace out west. Well, for me, I really am. It's a funny Jersey joke. For me, out west is anything west of Philadelphia. I consider there's the East Coast.
Most of the country.
Yeah, there's Philadelphia and then Montana, as far as I know. So, but anyway, they're saying that cider is rising faster, and cider sales are increasing beyond craft beer's rate.
Well, we even see that when we do some of these events where we actually pour
That's
beer.
exactly what I was thinking.
The case in point was the Shore Craft Beer event that we had in Ocean City. We went through more cider than of course, we only have one keg of cider.
Right.
Versus the
A
4 other beers.
Yeah.
But we had people coming back time and time again wanting cider, and we were just giving small samples, but people just wanted that cider rather than some people are just not beer people. So,
right. And
they want something else.
What was interesting about the article, well, first of all, the growth thing, it's gonna grow faster because it's smaller. Anything that's just starting to become popular is growing faster than something that's already popular. But what interested me was that according to the article, it's also getting more popular to brew, and that's easier to brew, right?
Yeah, we've got kits that have just the juice and whatever flavoring. I mean, we've got some with pear, blueberry, spiced apple, just regular apple, cherry. But all of them are a cider-based or apple-based wine that you ferment and add the flavoring to it.
And you don't have to. Do you do the boiling? Does it
no boiling at all.
It's
all the juice has been concentrated for shipping purposes. So you just reconstitute it with water, pitch the yeast, and it comes with
wait 2 weeks, right? Get your straw.
Generally, it's 2 weeks. Be in the bottle in 2 weeks, maybe even a little less. We find that the yeast does give off a little bit of a sulfur smell and taste that you need to rack it and splash it so that it drives off that sulfur. But the sulfur ages out if you wait long enough, but you can drive that off during the end of fermentation. And another thing they come with a sweetener. So you can have it either dry, which is very on the tart side, or you can add some sweetener to sweeten it up so it's not too tart for you.
And I just want to follow when you say rack it and splash it. I don't know what those things.
Siphon. You can siphon it from fermenter into secondary or into carboy, the big glass jug.
Right, and that'll keep it.
We usually put a funnel on top of it and splash it off the side of the funnel, which kind of aerates it and dries. You can actually smell the sulfur, and it's just one of those characteristics that comes out of the cider. Now
I'm wondering because one of the questions that I get a lot, and one of the questions that I'm trying to answer in my book is about cider, because cider was more popular here because I think when they used to make beer in the 1600s, I think that they were just boiling the barley. I don't think that they were malt. I don't think they were malting it.
Oh, okay.
Because they were some of the evidence I see is that some people were like in Wilmington, there was a malt house.
Yeah.
But in the country, there wasn't a malt house, and rather than malt it themselves, I think. So is that even possible, or is the account crazy?
It
wouldn't taste good, but
right. I thought you had to malt it in order to get the starches created. Otherwise, you don't get any alcohol out of it.
so if you just boil the barley, you probably wouldn't get the sugars you needed.
No.
And so in the cider, the reverse is true. Like if they could just boil the
They
juices.
probably wouldn't even boil it. It would have been generally for apples. You take them, you kind of cut them all up, and then you crush them and get the juice out. And to that juice, it will ferment as is because there's yeast and bacteria on the outside of the apple anyway, so it's going to ferment. And a lot of hard ciders were drank very young. I mean, it would be fermented for a week and you were ready to drink.
Right, ready to drink it. So
because there was no bottling early on, it would be somewhat effervescent because fermentation is still going on. So you'd have a little that
casket.
CO2. Well, they could cask possibly, but I think most of the time it was just
right now. Just dip it.
Just dip it. And, may have been heated in the wintertime a little bit.
And now
as a warmer.
One of the things that I was noticing also is that you would need a bunch of sugar, like that's the
molasses
and molasses. Well,
yeah.
And that's the thing. This barley thing, I've got to see if I can find it because it really gave me the impression that they were just boiling the barley and then adding molasses. And then having
that may
beer.
be If you add molasses, that's your sugar, that's your alcohol,
oh.
and we can test that.
That's fun. Yeah,
I have to go get some. You can go to. I've done it before. You can go to one of the local granaries
and just get a 2-row barley.
Well,
a 6-row barley.
Whatever they got. Probably 6-row.
Whatever. Because they probably weren't using 2-row for.
Right. I think they still use 6-row for cattle or whatever.
Right.
But
and just boil that up and throw in some molasses and then just
you might have some flavor.
Wait for the yeast
to
fall from the sky.
Well, we put a cultured yeast in, so we're going to get good results. But
and that's the thing. It probably didn't taste. It probably didn't taste great. I guess I don't know if you add enough molasses to anything. I like molasses. I know a lot of people don't, but I've always been I'll eat the molasses candy.
Yeah.
All the molasses.
And the reason they would have used probably molasses is it's what's left over after they extract the brown sugar or the sugar.
They were still
cheap.
Yeah, they were still importing that, so they were getting it. But that makes so much more sense now because it seemed like an awful lot of molasses for a place that was also importing rum. Like, they would make the rum in the Caribbean.
Right.
So we're getting the rum, and I never got why we needed the molasses as well. And I'm thinking that at least for a cheap sweetener, but also for beer, it must have been.
Could have been, yes.
To get
and for sweet feed for the horses.
Right.
For energy. I mean, you got to remember, up until just 100 and some years ago, it was all horse and buggy. So
right. So you needed to keep them.
Yep, keep their energy up from the winter. Everybody had a horse in the barn out back or two. So
and they needed to feed them. So
yep.
So anyway, cider.
Yes. Before we get off the track on that one.
But that's cool. One of the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, we can talk more about it off air because I wanted to say something to Ed too, is that although I couldn't find a recipe for the beer that they were making that was Diamond State beer, I did discover that almost all of the brewers were from the same town in Germany.
Oh,
and I wonder if it could be easier to find, like, what was the prevailing
beer at the time. Yeah.
Beer at the time in Germany. That might be something that.
And probably you can tell from if you find a town, what region they're from, and then
starts with B. Baden-Württemberg. But Baden, well, because there's Baden's in the middle of something of a different.
Have to look up.
Yeah, but anyway, Baden-Württemberg, I think, is where, and really, like, all of the brewers from the early German production breweries in Wilmington were from this town. And I'm like, oh, I've got to have a guess. I mean, you know, may not have a.
Probably meant they had some kind of a school there or had a brewery that
they were brewing there, right?
Yeah.
And they learned to brew there, and
Yeah.
then they came here and they got jobs. And what was really interesting about that, and it's so different from my story about Maryland beer, was because like the guy who made Diamond State Brewery, a guy made a brewery, it failed. This guy came in and he's like, I'm going to buy this brewery and I'm going to become a production brewer. And it was because a lot of the other stores are like, you know, up from your bootstraps kind of, you know, let me, and he's like, no, I'm an industrialist and I'm going to be a beer industrialist. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, we were talking before and I didn't mention it, is that the DuPonts were actually involved in this coalition of women for beer, or coalition of women for temperance. And they campaigned to...
So that's women against beer.
Well, for temperance.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people don't realize is that the temperance movement was different from the prohibition movement.
Yeah.
The temperance was drink less, which meant get rid of rum and not beer.
Yeah, right.
And the prohibition movement
stuff.
was get rid of everything,
Yeah.
right? And so it really is kind of weird. You're like, women for temperance, how are
Okay,
they
yeah, I
for
can see
beer?
that.
But that's what it was, right? And
So you had to drink a whole lot more to become intoxicated with ciders
Absolutely.
and beer
than you did with rum.
whiskey or rum. Yeah.
And so she, Mrs. DuPont, was the secretary of this national lobbying movement. And one of the reasons was that beer was actually a pretty large industry in Wilmington, at least at the time. And Joseph Steckel, who's the guy who owned it, was kind of a heavy hitter. And it's fun to watch, like, having, from my own perspective in the newspaper business, it's fun to see the subtleties, like in the late 1800s and through the early 1900s. They were trying to say nice things about the Germans, like, these are Germans, but they're not those. They're not the bad Germans. These are the good Germans, you know. And they would always talk about, you know, his German heritage. He's an upstanding citizen of German heritage, of German heritage, because they knew that when the war started, there was going to be a problem, and the war was one of the big factors, because you go to war with Germany, and then you see all of these Germans drinking in these huge beer gardens every Sunday, and it makes you nervous. And that was one of the things that gave the prohibition movement a little bit of steam.
Yeah. But I can see promoting local beer brewing, because it does create jobs. I mean, you get malt house.
Oh yeah.
You have to have a farmer grow it. It'd be malted and then it'd be brewed, versus the rum, which was all taken care of down in the Caribbean.
Yeah, down in the Caribbean.
So.
And they had a huge. One of the things that it's unfortunate it's missing now. It's not missing. The land is still there, but in Wilmington, do you know your way around Wilmington much?
No, I do not.
There's this huge YWCA, and it's next door to this other huge building. It's 223 and 225. I think it's King Street.
Okay.
That used to be the beer garden.
Oh, okay.
So you're talking two buildings in a at least mid-sized American city, two buildings worth of beer garden that goes all the way back and all the way up. And it was apparently just an absolute, you know, I'm sorry, not apparently, I'm going to make this up and then I'm going to put it into print and then it's going to be true. But it's just a wonderful place to spend a Sunday afternoon. And it was common. This you probably know, to bring kids and the family and everybody would sit there.
Probably had music of some sort.
Yeah, they'd have music and they'd have beer and they'd celebrate their Germanness, and it would just be on Sunday and then back to work on Monday.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine how awesome it must have been to go. I think of these. I've not been to one. You've been to proper beer halls.
Yes, yes. But one of the most notable and we've been to Munich, to the typical Hofbrauhaus.
Right.
But one I remember is in Salzburg, and it was in the basement of a church, and that's supported the church, but they had somebody actually, I think, brewing the beer, but it was still served in wooden casks. This was
that's great.
7 or 8 years ago we were there. But get this huge, I guess, half barrel size, or still half keg size, what we call it. And they would drive the wooden peg in or the wooden spigot.
Yeah. Oh, the spigot to get the beer out.
Right.
Oh wow, with a hammer, just
just drive
smack.
it in, and the beers kind of splatter all over the place. They give you a glass, and they had a fountain that you would cool because some of them were hot when they give it to you. They're washing them all the time, and it was hot or warm, so you cool it off before when you got in line.
Right.
And I think they had 2 different beers, mostly light
brown
or dark.
Brown and yellow.
Light and dark. But it was good. It's very good. And I think there were 3 rooms, big rooms. I mean,
right.
Basketball court size room, not with the stands and everything,
right,
but that size of the basketball court. And they had the typical long tables, and you go in and find a table, sit down, and sometimes you were sitting with somebody, some you weren't. It was just a regular beer hall. I would really love. I've never been. There must be one close enough. I think that I'd like to. I'd love to have that experience.
Sorry. So how often do you think they could reuse the casks? Are those a one-time thing?
No. They would
beer casks you can use until they're not.
They were generally waxed or paraffined on the inside. It was probably inch or inch and a quarter oak with the rings around it.
Right.
They would use them time and time again, I think, until they got so probably beat up from.
But it'd be more damage than infection because they have the inside is protected.
So, and I understand that even in modern, I consider 70s still modern times.
Yeah.
Guinness did wooden kegs up until sometime in the 70s.
Oh, really?
So
that's good. Well, I guess they didn't. Well, they were still a big beer company. I mean, it's not like Budweiser was doing.
I don't know
kegs up until the 70s, but yeah, I would imagine that Guinness, because Guinness has always had, it's always been a little bit, well, it used to be always a little bit more expensive and traded on that authenticity.
I think then they went to the stainless.
Right, like everybody else. Yeah. Well, we actually haven't hit on any of our other things, but we're running up against the clock here. I do want to mention the other story that we had 2 more stories I think picked out to tell. They're both on. Look, this is us on the internet right now. How crazy is that? Wait till I point. All right, I'm not going to point. I don't know how far behind. Apparently, there's more than a little bit of lag time between what I'm seeing and what you're seeing. But it looks from what I can tell, this is an infographic with the countries with the most breweries, and by a quick nod, the U.S. has 4,000.
What's that big circle there?
That's the big circle in the middle. I think the next largest looks like it might be France with 654, or UK. The UK was 723. But it looks as if among the larger...
Well, I would expect Germany to be in there somewhere.
Germany's at 307, but I wonder what makes a brewery. I mean... Yeah. Well, I mean, if they're counting U.S. craft, they must have to count German craft, but maybe they're not counting. I don't know how. Do the Germans do a lot of house beers? Is that a common thing where?
I think a lot of it, at least my understanding, I've not been to anything outside of Munich in Germany, but understood that there were a lot of towns that had their own brewery.
Right.
Maybe so that's not the case anymore.
Or maybe it's just that Germany's so small. I think sometimes we forget how big
United States,
how big the U.S. is. You know, it's just a massive, massive place. And you can drive, you were telling me, right? You can drive from Germany to the ocean faster than you can drive from New York to Los Angeles or whatever.
Oh, yes, much quicker.
Yeah, it's Europe is the East Coast size. And so if you think of it that way, you know, they would have maybe 2,000 breweries on the East Coast. So it seems proportional.
Right. But I mean, Europe's more like the United States in the fact that the countries there are states here.
Right, yeah. And
so you got France being huge, you got Texas being huge.
Right. So anyway, it's I guess it's not as odd as it looks, but it still looks pretty odd when you see it. So please take a look at it. It is at surecraftbeer.com under this week's Beer with Strangers episode number 78. And of course, as always, you can find all of the other things that we have at extremebrewing.com, with or without the X, no, with or without the E. I do that every week. Without you'll get there and click on everything else, and you'll find you can find us socially. You can find the podcast, which with any luck we'll be starting to. Our plan is to have the new podcasts up hopefully next week, maybe the week after. Like I said, I'm having a little trouble with the audio. I apologize. I'll get it fixed. I promise. One of the things is sometimes I forget we have a little microphone here. Sometimes I forget to turn it on, and so the ambient sound from that is awful, so I don't put it up. But it's on now, so if I can't get this working, I'll just download and upload the new audio from this, so that we're back on audio. What do you guys got coming up? You got anything coming up this week?
We got a class on Saturday. I think it's wine. And I got wine class next Tuesday in Lewis, and that's it for now.
Very cool. So, and as always, if you're interested and you want to get a bunch of people together and come in for a beer class, that can be arranged.
Or a wine class.
Or a wine class that can be arranged. I ran into a guy, and he said he'd always been meaning to come, but he didn't know, he always wanted to see about brewing, but he didn't know about, coming to classes or what would happen. And I said, get a bunch of people together, come out, piece of cake. So don't be afraid to do that. And why don't you say the outline? Let's try that. Do you remember our outline?
Yeah, but I don't remember the exact words.
Drink what you like and be happy?
Yeah, think that. Drink what you like and be happy.
See.
Drink what you like and be happy, yes.